Here we go.
Okay.
That
worked.
Yeah. There you go. You don't know.
We do know. Believe me, we know.
We had a similar instance where we had a wonderful speaker, Sister Helen Prejean, where the same exact thing happened with Zoom. So,
you know, we could spend this whole entire time just talking about what we've learned, what we've experienced.
Our experiences, yes.
There you go.
What we can laugh at and what we could cry at, right?
That's right. So folks are flowing in, so we'll give it just another minute.
That's great.
I gained a few more gray hairs in that few moments.
You handled it very well. We're impressed.
All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, folks. I want to welcome everyone tonight to our Great Wednesday webinar. This is a little bit different tonight, where I'm going just to do a brief opening, and then I'm going to turn this over to the Rev'd Canon Nicholas Porter, who will be facilitating this evening. The part I want to share with you tonight is that tonight's webinar is offered in thanksgiving for the lives of the late Angie and Stuart Kensinger, beloved members of Palmer Memorial Church. Stuart served as treasurer of the Jerusalem Peacebuilders board until his untimely death. Angie helped with hospitality during the summer JPB programs in Houston. The promise and possibilities of peace building in the Holy Lands fueled their Christian faith and Stuart's involvement in the Houston Interfaith movement. Their son, Philip Kensinger, now serves on the JPB board. And so we are pleased to partner tonight with Jerusalem Peacebuilders to offer this event for you. If you have questions, please leave them in the chat, and I will manage that and share your questions with the Rev'd Canon Nicholas Porter, who will take care of those toward the end of this evening. Thank you. Nicholas Porter.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. And let me begin by thanking the vestry and rector of Palmer Church for the imagination and the energy of organizing this interfaith discussion in honor of Stuart and Angie Kensinger. Thank you, Father Neil, for making this happen on this night. For those of us who knew and still love Stuart and Angie, tomorrow is the second anniversary of their death, which is heartbreaking for me and many others. And I know that Philip has joined us tonight and is watching. So may they rest in peace and be in that close embrace of God. I am delighted to be able to be the moderator in our panel discussion tonight. We have with us Rabbi Amy Small and Father Neil Willard. And we're going to have a great discussion. Before I tell you a little bit about our speakers, I do want to throw in the disclaimer that Jerusalem Peacebuilders has been involved with all our speakers in one way or another. So my positive prejudice is fully disclosed in this matter. Let me tell you now about our first distinguished speaker, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order by their first names, and that's Rabbi Amy Joy Small, who is the senior rabbi of Ahavi Zedek Synagogue in Burlington. She's been there, Burlington, Vermont, my home state as well. She's been there since 2016. She served quite a bit in New Jersey, where she started Deborah's Palm Center that helped adults and assisted adults in embracing and growing in and through their Jewish experience. She also has quite a distinguished record in service to the larger Jewish community in the Northeast, also beyond. She has been a fellow at Rabbis Without Borders. She has traveled to Pakistan, and we are delighted she is with us. She's also worked closely for, and I know some of our listeners or attendees know this, She's worked closely with Kids for Peace International, with which Jerusalem Peacebuilders got its start long ago, 10 years ago. Many of you know, Father Neil, not a rabbi yet, Father Neil Willard, who's the rector of Palmer Memorial Episcopal Church in Houston. He's also a member of, director of the board of the Episcopal Health Foundation, which is one of the largest such foundations in the country, and is a leader, a cutting edge of medical research at the moment, and an enormous funder of health and well-being in the United States. Father Neil is a native of North Carolina, and he is also a former classmate of mine at the Yale Divinity School. So Rabbi Amy, Father Neil, we're delighted you're here with us today. I'm going to share with you our format so that all our listeners can understand where we're going, is that we're going to just begin with some conversation, and we'll start with Rabbi Amy, and then we'll make our way to Father Neil and back again. I hope everyone will send us some questions, which we're going to leave plenty of time for. It's my firm belief that the real opportunity in these kinds of events is to be able to ask your own question. We watch all kinds of incredible people online, on the television, etc., but we don't get to ask them our question. So if you are attending this and listening in, I really want to encourage you not to be shy and put together the hardest questions you possibly can for these two speakers. So our overall theme is how this great ordeal of COVID-19, and it has been an ordeal, has affected our spirituality as religious leaders and affected the life and practice of our congregations. So I'm going to start with you, Rabbi Amy, and I'd love you to share with us what you've learned about God's presence and community through the pandemic that now strengthens how you lead your congregation.
Well, thank you so much. It's a privilege and an honor to be with you and to be with all of you out there. So thank you for this opportunity to think out loud. I have found myself during these past couple of weeks, I got my second vaccine 2 weeks ago, and the opportunity for reflection is just bubbling up. So this is a great way to have that conversation. I'm going to answer your question, I do promise, but I want to point out that there was a really moving piece in the New York Times, which just came out on the 21st, which would be today, that's called Emerging from the Coronavirus. And it's stories and quotes. And I think this offers a tremendous spiritual setting. Before I go into the specifics that relate to this question, I want to share a few quotes. What will it be like when we go back to life? Will it be the same, we wonder? These are not just logistical questions, these are spiritual questions, because our own internal transformation has been so dramatic. So here's one quote. I don't think I can go back to a quote unquote before. I don't think I fit into that life anymore. From Mary Fugate. Another quote, I care much more about being with people who make me feel whole now. The pandemic scraped away all facades we've built around our lives. And what more could we say that's a spiritual message than that? And here's one more. I should say who said that. That was Elena Cruz. Again, this is from the New York Times, so I don't know these people, but they are quoted here. Here's one more. It has made me realize that I'm no more than human, and that there is nothing I can think of or do to change that, and that I must embrace that for whatever it means. Wow, what a spiritual message that is as well. As we've come to understand what we can and cannot control and what is most important. And I can say from my place in my community, first thing that comes to my mind, and it's told here in some of these quotes, is that people matter and community matters. And that is where God's presence is found, between us, with us, and the way we care for each other. That God has given us strength and resilience during this very trying, and in some cases frightening and mournful and sad time. And even through that strength and resilience that many of us didn't realize had such depth and breadth, is right there to lift us up and keep us going. And that internal building of who we are is part of our spiritual journey, but we must do it together. We've learned that we are far more capable than we imagined ourselves to be, and that God's gifts are abundant and present in ways we may not have noticed in our daily lives of chasing after our passions, our pursuits that really don't mean anything. Now we had to face what really does mean something. We've learned that our caring is the work of God. And we knew that before, but we felt it in all kinds of deeper ways. We've learned about taking our masks off, and I'm not talking about our face masks. That we should keep on. I'm talking about the masks we wear for how we wish to project ourselves. You know, how many people dressed more casually for their Zoom meetings at work, and then as time passed, teased each other for the casualness of life in their homes and their decor, in the ways that we've seen into each other's homes and into each other's lives, and worn sweatpants, and all that stuff that's about just being ourselves. And that is a spiritual message as well. That's the way God created us, and we can own it more. We knew that family matters, but oh my goodness, during this time, there's been nothing more important. And for some people who have family members who have been ill, and even the worst, those who have lost family members, we have grieved and held them. And for people like me who have adult children who don't live at home anymore, or in 3 different states, it's hard. We can't be with our kids. We can't be with grandchildren. And we are reminded by that immobility just how important those relationships are. And we've been reminded how much we must help each other, that this is the work of sacred community. When the pandemic started and we started to move on to Zoom in our synagogue life, a lot of our older members didn't know how to do it. And my husband, who's a tech person, he right away put out his phone number and said, call me if you need. And he spent hours on the phone with people, one after the other, and is still available for those who ask. This was a time not only for learning, but for assisting, holding each other's hands in a virtual way. So those are my answers for your first question.
If I could just push you a little bit, I love that. I love it, that the way you've emphasized for us that people matter, both the people around us, the people known, the people less known, and ourselves, and the image of God in which we've all been created in this very mysterious way. And there is certainly no bouncing back. There's just bouncing forward. We are just going to bounce forward, in part with this newly reclaimed consciousness. How do you think some of this is going to affect your leadership in snowy Burlington?
Well, I can tell you that synagogues all over the country as I've been reading about and talking to colleagues, are going through dramatic change. All of us are going through dramatic change because people's interests, tastes, needs were already shifting, but dramatically have shifted in the past year. And so in my congregation in Ohavi Zedek Synagogue, which dates back to 1885 and has had many eras and times of change, this was a time that sparked some concern for our future, and in the most extremely positive way, an imagining process that has begun to consume all of our time and has involved most of our members in deep and meaningful and lasting conversation. So I think if the pandemic had not happened, we might have just sort of limped along until we realized that we have to think about our future in a different way. And it would have been more challenging to get to that moment. We were sort of catapulted here, and it's a good thing we're here and we're owning it.
Thank you. Thank you. So Father Neil, I think I want to sort of jump off that last bit of Rabbi Amy's response, which is, as we think about no bouncing back and no bouncing, things can't be the same. Welcome, Imam Bilal. How do you think how do you think the pandemic has changed Palmer as a community?
I think, first of all, to sort of jump off of what Rabbi Amy said, I think it's made us not take for granted how important and how wonderful and really how miraculous the gift of community is. I mean, I think that's just the first thing. For the first 6 months, we gathered together online on Sundays for prayers, in our homes dispersed throughout the city of Houston. And for the last 6 months, we've continued that, but also held in-person services, mostly outdoors, except for those times when we were advised it was reasonably safe to offer an indoor option. And in our setting, in our church here in Houston, those outdoor worship services are held on the lawn, and they're on the lawn between the church buildings and the Texas Medical Center, which is the largest medical complex in the world. It's an interesting place to gather for worship. And sometimes during the prayers, sometimes as we're about to receive Holy Communion and talking about life and death as we remember the last meal that Jesus had with his disciples, sometimes right when those things are happening, we can hear a life flight helicopter landing on the roof of a building that's just across the intersection from the church, or we can hear the siren of an ambulance rushing to an emergency room into the medical center. And I hope that these sounds never become like, wallpaper in the background for us. I hope that members of my congregation will always hear them as nothing less than what we might call in the Christian community a Kyrie, a plea for Christ to have mercy, a prayer that's really a part of our worship. And I think that the pandemic has really brought us face to face with those realities with life and death. I mean, the very things that we are always talking about as Christians, and it's happening, around us while we're worshiping. And I also hope that as we slowly re-enter our buildings, and we restarted indoor worship for 2 services last Sunday, and we'll continue that this Sunday, that I hope that we'll love the right things in the right order. People like to say love's the solution, but sometimes love's the problem when we love the wrong things we can love the right things in the wrong order. I guess that's how I want to put it. It's okay to have a strong sense of place and to love the building. And I love the building where Palmer gathers for worship. That causes a flood of memories for me and for people who've been there for many years to wash over us. It's okay to love music that only sounds a certain way when we're inside that space. It's okay to love the rituals that animate that space, that bring it alive. But those kinds of beauty create a frame around the source of all of that beauty, which for Christians, we would say that's the presence of Christ in the word proclaimed, the sacrament received, in the body of Christ gathered in the congregation. And that happens whether we're inside or outside the building, right? So if we can have our aha moment about that now, and then take that sense of awe and wonder at the presence of Christ in our midst with us back into the building, then we will have grown closer to Christ after the pandemic than some of us were before the pandemic. And I don't want to have to go through a pandemic in order to have a spiritual experience like that. But, I do believe that God is always bringing good out of evil. And so maybe that will be one of the good things that goes with us.
Thank you. And good out of evil and blessings out of suffering. I think a theme that is familiar to all of us. I'd like to just take this moment to introduce my good friend, Imam Bilal Ansari, to you. Welcome, Bilal. I want everyone to know that Imam Bilal also comes to us from blessed New England as well. And it is the beginning of Ramadan. It's, I think, the second week of Ramadan has begun. And this is a season when Muslims give thanks for the gift of God's word in the Quran, the gift of the Quran. And it's a time of fasting and a special time of focusing on how one can improve the world as the word, God's word, improves this world. So I'm going to have a question for Imam Bilal about that, but I do want to just share with you all a little bit about I'm doing this terribly, Imam Bilal. I called Neil a rabbi.
Yeah.
The only right person to call that is, of course, Rabbi Amy. Imam Bilal is very experienced and multifaceted at present. He is the director of the chaplaincy program and faculty associate for Muslim pastoral theology at the Hartford Seminary in Hartford, Connecticut, which is a seminary that is very distinguished in many ways, but particularly that it has for over 100 years now focused on Christian-Muslim relations particularly. And Imam Bilal is part of that living tradition. He is also the assistant vice president for campus engagement at Williams College in Western Massachusetts, a very fine and outstanding private college where his work inspires the minds of people who will inspire others. He is also very active in Jerusalem Peacebuilders summer programs. I put in my disclaimer early on that everyone is somehow connected with Jerusalem Peacebuilders. So welcome, Imam Bilal. I'd like to ask you a question that just connects right to Ramadan, but also to the news that's been in the headlines from yesterday afternoon to the present. And I'd love it if you would share with us some of the spiritual insights that the pandemic has given you into the ills of racism and religious bigotry in our country, but also into their cures, right? How we address those in positive ways. So how has the pandemic kind of opened your heart and soul and mind to that?
Well, first of all, I want to give honor to God and to Rabbi Amy, to Reverend Neil, and to Reverend Nick, and to Roger from Palmer Church. I'm honored to be a part of this holy event of sharing God's witness in His Word. So I think I want to take from the book of Isaiah, which hung over my door as a child. My mother, I grew up in a Black church. My grandfather was a pastor of a church in New Haven. And there was a banner that hung over our door before we went out the house every day that my mother had us read from Isaiah: "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." And so we had to read that verse every day. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, until it sink deep in your spirit, and your focus on life. Um, and it has. And so I have carried that throughout um, my life. I think when I was in college years, the Rodney King trials were going on in my college years. I was very much an activist out in like Berkeley. We were involved in the Bay Area Bridge, shutdown um, as a student. And it's just been marching ever since. It's just unfortunately been a nonstop event. The trauma of hatred, racial hatred, is deep into my family. I've been older in life, been asking questions about my family members who kind of went through the South, and come to learn that my grandfather's brother was lynched, and my grandfather never spoke of it. And when I asked him, he just goes silent. He just looks into this space, and then the daughters and uncles from my uncle, from my grandfather's brother, um, only one daughter who was trying to seek for questions also um, would want to know, but nobody would speak of it. And so to have us at this place now where the nation is talking about this, and to have a point where at finally um, for the verdicts to land where they landed, as I was watching those verdicts, literally I could feel my blood pressure rise. I can feel my palms of my hands go wet, um, and just deep in my soul, just hoping for like relief, not only for myself, but I feel the same way that our nation is in a high blood pressure moment and feeling the same things. And so I was hoping, praying for that for my nation. So I had just prayed my midday prayer, and spiritually I was in a good place, mentally I was in a good place, but in my body, um, I carried I carried that, almost like the verse in the scripture that you was carrying. It's the like body of Christ, and in that sense, it's that not only the physical body or the church house, but the community, just wherever you are on earth, where you find community, is the body of Christ. And his was a body of love and complete like sacrifice. And so in a sense, I was hoping and praying for like let there be some relief, Lord. And and so when those verdicts hit, it was a bit of relief. At that, my blood pressure came down, I dried up, and I can be at peace a bit with our nation a bit. But I know this is just the first step of a long journey that we have, and our nation is pretty torn right now. Is pretty torn right now, and so this model here it needs to be like taken on the road, and we need to do a lot more of this this intergroup like dialogue, because our nation is in need of it. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. I just broke my fast. I just prayed. I'm sorry to come late. I also got my first shot yesterday, and I'm feeling in pain right now. I'm feeling not well because of the shot, but sorry, I am here. I made it. Sorry.
Sure. Well, thank you for being here. So I want to just follow up a little bit with you, if I might, Imam Bilal. And thank you for sharing what was on your heart and your soul and on your body, both yesterday and in the years leading up in your life to this moment. How has this, what we've been describing earlier, this sort of ordeal of the pandemic, how did that help frame what happened yesterday for you?
I mean, I mean, it's on several different levels. There's members of my community that um I can remember going in the morning to get my shot. There was a older Black woman whose daughter was literally dragging her in to get her shot, and she's cursing the the system the whole way. She's like, "I can't believe you're gonna poison me. You know what they did to Black people. This is, how are you gonna do this to me? I hope this isn't the Johnson and Johnson. You see, people are dropping dead." And he's just really railing, and so I pulled my chair next to her, and I started to sing like a gospel song. You know, there was no sign there. She wasn't wearing a cross or anything, but she's a Black woman. She's gonna know the gospel song. So I just started hymning a gospel song, and she looked at me with my Muslim cap on. She started hymning the gospel song and started to calm down. And then she started hymning this song, and then everybody in the room started to sing the song, and a peace, just kind of came over. The room as we were rating our 15 minutes to be relieved. And I just, so for when Williams College gathered after this afternoon at noon, we had a post verdict college like a gathering, and everybody was just in shock, and just some people were sharing some things, and our president said, "Bilal, how do you get through this?" And so I played this like gospel song. I said, "This is how I get through it," and like no weapon formed against me is a song that they made up. And so um, this pandemic, on many levels, I think of it on many um, many levels. It has done good. Like, who said that out of evil comes good? That is a chronic motif also. Inna ma'al usri yusra, inna ma'al usri yusra. Surely through difficulty comes ease. Surely through difficulty comes ease. And so um, one of the things in which this one of the like benefits this has done, like I've had a lot of time with immediate like family, with with my wife and children, that normal rhythms of the day kind of like takes you away from. um I found the app that you take a picture of the pictures and trees, and it tells you what they are. So I've learned the names of all of the plants and trees in my yard, in my neighborhood. So I got a chance to learn about the plant life more intimately than I ever would. And I appreciate that. And so there's a lot of things I'm just counting the blessings of my Lord, and I just encourage people to do the same. Um, some people are dying from long, like chronic, like sicknesses. Some die in an instant. Some die without even knowing that they were going to you just never know when that hour is. And so, but the blessing is just to be grateful through the whatever you're going through. And so that's one of the lessons I'm taking of both the racial pandemic of my life and this pandemic moment.
Thank you. I love that you talked about appreciating the nature and the world, the creation around you. Rabbi Amy talked about appreciating all the people around us and our relationship, including ourselves. So sort of connected to what Imam Bilal has been talking about, Rabbi Amy, how has the pandemic experience affected your community's relationship with other communities in Vermont, whether on religious connection or social connection, or around some of these great challenges before our nation and our society?
The shifting and the broadening of relationships has been remarkable. So the first thing I want to share is that before the podcast, before the pandemic started, I started with two close buddies of mine here in the Burlington area in our community, a podcast with a friend who is the pastor at a congregational church, and our dear friend who's the imam of the local mosque. And those are really treasured relationships. And we had been working on it for many months. And then all of a sudden, we're in our houses, and the little studio that one of them set up in his house, because he likes all those toys, was wonderful, except we couldn't use it. And we were in front of our computers, and there was something so special about the opportunity to come onto the Zoom and talk to each other about just stuff in life through our spiritual lens, and to interview leaders in our community. We interviewed various governmental leaders and cultural leaders. We had some great conversations, which ordinarily would have been just a by-the-by thing that we did. But what it did was it gave our communities a sense of groundedness as we had those conversations and put them out there for the world to hear in our podcast. And in fact, an old friend from New Jersey, where I used to live, started listening to the podcast, and he was so excited about it. And knowing Burlington is where Ben & Jerry's is from, he sent us a Ben & Jerry's, sent us a Ben & Jerry's gift certificate that we should all go have ice cream. And I am sorry to say, for my dear friend Lou in New Jersey, we haven't been able to do that yet, but we have something to look forward to. So that's one example, but there are many more. We've been able to do programs with colleagues of different faiths. Because we're virtual, we just ask people to come on the computer, and we've had some great programs that have expanded our capacity. And in fact, this coming week, just a week from tomorrow, we're going to be doing a program with a colleague of mine who's a senior rabbi of a synagogue in Manhattan, a very storied and highly regarded synagogue. And she is of Korean descent through her mother. And she's going to be talking about the barriers that have been created by viewing ourselves through the prism of race, and what her experience and her wisdom has been. And we can do that with her because we've learned how to do things virtually. And that's an example among many. We've had lots of local Zoom gatherings with local clergy and civic leaders as well, but I'm sure everybody has. But it has opened for us just abundant possibilities that we're going to keep doing once we're back in person.
So let me just ask you just a theological follow-up to this.
Okay.
What is it about the human condition or the human spirit that seems to require some kind of calamity or ordeal for us to appreciate one another and the loving presence of God? Why do we need that? Why do we learn more from negative things than positive things, perhaps?
Well, I guess I'd like to say that I'm not sure that we need it. I'm not sure the premise is a premise that I would consider to be my spiritual foundation or my belief system. It is certainly true, as we observe what happens in life, that dark times, difficult times, illness, the pandemic, loss of a job, relationships, all those things create openings for us if we know how to seize those openings. But I don't think it's a necessary condition. When I think about, sorry, I keep looking over this way. There's a glass door, and my two little dogs are banging on it, trying to get my attention. And we have one is 6 years old and one is a 4-month-old puppy. So my husband, because he knows I'm on the Zoom, he came over to try to separate them and keep things calm. And I think about when I met my husband and how much on a daily basis I am so grateful to God for having brought us together. If we train ourselves to notice the good and the beautiful, then spiritual openings are present for us all the time. It's not that we need bad things to happen. God willing, when bad things happen, we know how to turn them into something better.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Father Neil, would love to build on that, please, around this idea of training ourselves to see those openings. When you cast your mind back over this 14 months of pandemic, which included all kinds of uncertainty and isolation, what would you say the most significant shifts in your personal relationship with God have been?
I think the preface to this would be that, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but it's been very strange as a member of the clergy to adjust to appearing on TV in the homes of parishioners. And that happens so quickly.
Yes.
And for those of us who pre-record our services for online worship, it's been especially challenging, at least for someone like me who's in a liturgical Christian tradition, to preach a Christmas sermon many days before Christmas, to perform all the rituals of Holy Week before Holy Week even begins. Or did it begin? And everyone's catching up to us. I mean, we're supposed to be on this journey through the liturgical calendar together as a congregation and with other people of the same faith throughout the world. But many of us are, in a sense, out of sync. And it's hard to put your mind in where it's supposed to be in the calendar to help other people go along this journey with you. But having said that, within the very first week or so after in-person services had initially stopped, and that was just mid-Lent season of Lent last year, I can remember at one point being the last person to lead the church after leading, a service that was being pre-recorded or live streamed. I don't remember at the time, but I was standing there in the church in front of empty pews and seeing the sanctuary lamp burning near the altar. And it was the only light in that darkened space. And it's supposed to remind Christians like me that Christ is present in that space as always, and in particular in the consecrated bread and wine that are left inside what we call a tabernacle, a small box that's right behind the altar and beneath the cross. And although I've always believed that Christ was present there, the circumstances surrounding that moment, surrounding those empty pews, really made it very real to me in a way that I can't fully explain. It's not that I didn't believe that before, but it was just powerfully real in that moment, in a way that I had not really experienced before. And I knew that the church would survive this. I mean, there was no guarantee that I would survive it, but I knew that the church would survive it and that Christ would be present in life and in death, in the present moment and in the future. And another time that I had an overwhelming sense of not being alone was, ironically, when I was alone downstairs in the church columbarium, where the ashes of those who've died are placed in niches around the wall of a small chapel. And I was standing there, actually dressed in church vestments, holding an urn with the ashes of a member of my church. And you're sort of standing there, you look around, and it really felt as if I was merely rehearsing something while waiting for other people to get there. But it wasn't a rehearsal. And I placed those ashes in a niche, and I said the traditional words from the Book of Common Prayer that Anglican Christians have said throughout the centuries, and that other priests were undoubtedly saying around the world on that same day. And again, I knew that I wasn't alone. And in that sense too, I knew that others were praying with me, that I wasn't alone in that sense either. And the last thing about that I wanted to share, a similar experience that really was unexpected to me. It didn't happen to me once, it happened to me twice. And that was reading the ancient Easter sermon of St. John Chrysostom at the Easter Vigil, the night before Easter morning. The last year we did that on Zoom. I was in the front yard of the church rectory with my family beside me, and a fire in a fire pit illuminating the darkness behind me. And then this year it was in person in the courtyard, and there was an adult who was baptized kneeling in a fountain, and the whole courtyard was filled with candlelight, filled with parishioners awaiting the first Eucharist of Easter. And Chrysostom's sermon is the best and shortest Easter sermon that's ever been written. But the thing was, I've read it dozens of times, but I felt like I was hearing it for the very first time. I mean, I got emotional, and especially last year, but also this year, but especially last year, I mean, I really had to pause a few moments as I was reading it, and it was really unexpected for me. Thinking about the resurrection of Christ and the way he talks about the defeat of everything that's standing between us and God, keeping us apart. And that just seemed very powerful at this moment. And so I hope that I'll carry, all of those kinds of experiences with me into a post-pandemic world, that they'll help me to see the presence of Christ in the world and to know that the prayers of many are, always surrounding the world, holding it, and the love of Jesus, which I think is the most simple definition of Christian prayer, and a beautiful definition of Christian prayer. And that's something I can do in the middle of a pandemic. So that's what I've done. But, the thing is, kind of like Rabbi Amy was saying, it's something I can do not in the middle of a pandemic.
Thank you. So, Imam Bilal, I love that what Father Neil was talking about, a certain kind of freshness and a reopening. And we remember that Ramadan is a time to the refreshment of the Muslim community and hopefully all humanity through them, of around justice and compassion and peace and family. Many of the things we've been talking about already. How do you think the pandemic is shaping how the Muslim community in New England, Connecticut, Massachusetts is going to be expressing its and showing a drive for compassion and justice this season?
Yeah.
I know it's big, but go for
Yeah.
it. Take the dare.
Yeah. So I mean, I would just look at it through the four the four virtues that 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 the Islamic frame of reference of the four cardinal virtues of wisdom, justice, modesty, and also the fourth one is like a courage. Just so justice is instead of from the model that Aristotle and Plato centered courage, Muslims center justice, and justice is the middle balance between all the other three virtues. So the other three virtues don't emerge until there's justice or a balance between the extremes of those virtues, which could end in vice, whether it's extreme in excess or extreme in want. And so the justice of like Ramadan is it causes you by fasting to look internally at how much you intake on yourself, how much necessarily do you actually need yourself, and look at all those around you and see if it's excessive, and see who's in want and give. And so that's the blessing of Ramadan and Iftar, is to kind of give to those who are in want, out of our recognition of our excesses. And by that process, there becomes a just balance, and a virtuous place. And so, and that act is courageous, and that act can also be a form of like modesty when you have excess. And so, and it's also wisdom. It's also the wisest thing to do, because the more you give, I have found the more you receive. And so, this is what this month brings, and it's what it's bringing here. We have a rotation of who can be in the space in the mosque. The mosque is the hub everybody wants to be. Everybody wants to be there, but the house is not the place. It's not the church. It's so you got to rotate out to share to, and so because you can only fit so much, and there's people praying outside, and so we're hoping because New England is a weird time, and last week it snowed in Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is 2 miles from Vermont. So probably snowed in Burlington too. So it snowed last Friday. So yeah, so can't really get outside much without the environmental uh the environment like bothering you. So um and so anyway, what's good also is that you have a longing, so you pick up the phone and call people. You make sure you reach out and touch, you go the extra mile. And so it is causing us to kind of not just depend on just people showing up there in the place and you see them, you greet them, but making every action intentional. That if you miss this person, let them know that you miss them. Reach out, I miss seeing your face. I miss giving you a hug, and so reach out, let them know that. And man, it it does a world of good. I There's this doctor in town who we sit on a board, all together, and he said, "I'm calling an emergency board meeting." I sit on the board of the Institute of Muslim Mental Health, and he's the chair of it. And he's going through a really hard time. He's had several suicides in the family, and his mother is sick and is being moved in the home, and there's a lot. And so I had just came from getting my shot, and I was in the neighborhood of his home, and I just drove by and I saw my uncle who I haven't seen in a while, and I talked to him outside and uplifted his spirits. And he lives right down the street from this like doctor. So I did a drive by, and his wife was outside, doing the yard, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing here chopping blows?" I was like, "I'm here to do a house call," and he is a he is a psychiatrist, at Yale. He teaches, but he's going through a moment. So she said, "Oh, the chaplain's here to do a house call for the psychiatrist of the house." And so she goes get him. He comes outside. He's just, "Oh, I so needed to see you right now." And so we're doing a thing on the lawn and just talking, uplift his spirits. And then I really go home and I pass out because this thing is starting to beat up my arm, something fierce. But yeah, so just doing the necessary to reach out and to touch, despite it all coming to you so easily, with the being able to have full access.
So I want to ask Rabbi Amy one last question before we start going into our questions. And before I pose the question to Rabbi Amy, I want to remind all our participants, if you haven't sent in a question, please do. That's the real strength of a live Zoom event like this, is we get to ask our question. And I know there's been some answering of questions very quietly over the chat, but please do send us more, and we'll ask also the ones that haven't been answered. So around doing the necessary, Rabbi Amy, how did the pandemic enhance the celebration of Pesach this year, the celebration of Passover? How did you feel the positive effects of this?
It's a great question. Of course, for us, we have a whole series of spring festivals. And so we're on the journey towards Shavuot, which you would call Pentecost. But we have many observances in the spring. So Passover already feels like a really long time ago. I had to go back and remember what I did. But before I even say that, to my colleague, Imam Ansari, a Ramadan Mubarak. I wish you a blessed Ramadan. I'm sorry we didn't have a chance to exchange those pleasantries earlier, but please. So I was fascinated with how this Pesach felt so different than last year because the pandemic had just started. I remember when we were first told we had to stay at home. And at the time it seemed like, okay, it'll be a couple of weeks. Oh, maybe it'll be a month. Oh, maybe it'll be more than a month. What? Passover at home? Like unimaginable. And of course, Passover is a home-based observance. So yes, that makes a lot of sense, but the synagogue Seder that we provide once a year for our community to come together seemed so out of our touch. But we worked really hard to create it a year ago, and we had a huge turnout. And at that point, people didn't know how to use Zoom. We had problems with muting and unmuting, and some of the funny things that can happen that weren't so funny at the time, but now they are, in the use of Zoom. And everybody just needed to be together. And besides, we couldn't have Seder with our family, with our friends. We had to figure it out somehow. This year felt so different because many people had mastered the use of the technology enough that they were able to be with their friends, with their family virtually, and in some cases, those vaccinated able to be with them in person in small clusters. And so we had many fewer people. And that actually felt nice in a different way. It had an intimacy to it that kind of recovers what it would feel like when we're in the synagogue together. And just this real sense of appreciation. Oh gosh, we have spent this year being together on this virtual screen, and we're still here and we're loving being together. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that Passover is about freedom. It's about being released, right? So liberation, it's a great celebration. And many of us are still waiting to be liberated, so to speak, from this pandemic isolation and the many, many challenges that have made it a narrow place for us. Mitzrayim, Egypt being a narrow place, a linguistically linked word. We talk about Egypt as a narrow place. And many of us still finding ourselves stuck in narrow places for a little while longer. And so we were able to focus on what it is that we're looking for and hoping for and imagining in our return, in our freedom, our exile being ended. And we were able to focus on what's happening in the world. It's so many difficult and significant things have been happening in the world. One of you mentioned that earlier was this, I think it was you, Imam, I'm sorry, that this has been a difficult year in so many ways. And because we weren't new to the pandemic life, and because we were settling in for this, our second Passover on the screen, we could just take a deep breath and focus on what's most important. And that is those who are still looking for their home, the immigration challenges in our country, Black Lives Matter, and the challenges that are faced by the Asian community. There were so many themes that we were able to work into our Seder that have to do with the challenges that our world and our country is facing, that are not just the pandemic, but have seemed larger than life during the pandemic. And they became our Passover themes along with the traditional Seder.
I'm having trouble with my unmuting. Thank you. Beautiful. So I want to start. I've been carefully trying to weave in some of the questions actually as we've been going along. But I do want to ask Father Neil a question that comes from Southern Vermont. And that is, and I'm going to reframe it just a little bit, which is we certainly have been talking very eloquently and very profoundly and very accurately about the many things we have gained, right? We've grown appreciation of one another, of the beautiful earth that surrounds us, of relationships, of the loving presence of God. But perhaps, Father Neil, you could also just reflect a little bit out loud for us about what has been lost. I mean, has the social distancing, which in the extreme form was all this, kind of lockdown isolation, but even still the way, someone coughs and people run away in a room now, that's had a cost, and maybe you could reflect a little bit on that for us.
Right, because everyone's experience of the pandemic is different. Everyone's circumstances are different. So, it's one thing for me to be here at the rectory with my wife and with our 3 dogs and our 2 sons and our 1 cat. I mean, and we have a kind of ecosystem here of our own. And that is very different from someone who is single and isolated in an apartment and misses socializing with friends in addition to being a part of the religious community. So that's a completely different experience of the pandemic. So it's like so many other things in life. I mean, it's not fair. And that, I know that's been really hard, and I don't know what that's like, because that is not my experience of it. Mine's different. Mine's hard in different ways. So the loss of relationships and connection, for sure has been tremendous and not equally shared among people. For Christians and my tradition, there's been so many questions about how do we worship online versus in person, and our tradition, the loss of not receiving communion in our hands has been, a tremendous thing that people have had to wrestle with. And we have chosen in our pre-recorded services to show the service that we would have if we were together, but only the priest who is at the altar partakes. And that's not the way it should be. But we've offered that so people can be reminded of what awaits us. And we have a prayer that we say when we can't receive communion. But then when we've come back in person outside, well, that's only some people, right? So some people are there, and again, so it's all kind of an unequal experience. Even when things are offered, they're offered to everyone, but not everyone's able to receive. So it's just sort of like being on this ladder, but everyone's on all different rungs at the same time, and it's hard as a Christian pastor to know, how do you respond to everybody on all the different rungs? And the people at the top, some of them want to climb up quicker, right? And but we have to remember everybody that's on the ladder. So I think just managing all of those relationships and responding in pastoral ways has just been a tremendous challenge.
Thank you. So Imam Bilal, I have a question that's connected to what Father Neil, or I'm going to connect it to what Father Neil was talking about with the hope of things to come, the celebration of the Christian Eucharist online, that while not everyone partakes that wants to, it is a pledge of what's to come. So a question from Houston, Texas, which is, what was the most difficult time for you during this pandemic? And what was that pledge? What was that thing, that word, that relationship, that memory, that experience that helped you come out of that low place?
Yeah. So thank you, Houston. Houston has had a difficult year. I just want to recognize that. Thinking about that place, that space. My prayers to everybody who's still in recovery from that. Oh yeah. So for me this year, witnessing the murder of George Floyd in such a visceral way was the lowest experience in this past year. in a sense, it was the image. It was the image that summarized the last 4 years, how the last 4 years has felt, and it was. Um, it was as if the last 4 years, as if blacks in America were walking the last steps of Jesus, with our cross, being stoned, cursed, spit at, um, Muslims being banned, and so it felt like that, and so to see the life, taken out of him, and him calling on his mother, being in communication with the next life as you're still in this life, and a witness on that, was an extremely low experience. And what got me out of that was my white uh, wife's niece, who was 9 months, like pregnant. She had a 4-year-old daughter, and she lives in Fairfield County, like Connecticut. Those who know Fairfield County know it's one of the most wealthiest places. But in that county, she's taking her 4 years old daughter. She's 9 months pregnant, to a Black Lives Matter march. I'm feeling very apathetic, very low. I can't march anymore. I've been marching since Rodney King. I'm not doing this. My wife is going out with her with her son. Are you coming? No, I'm not coming. And she comes back and she says, my niece was there, and her 4-year-old daughter, and her daughter, after the march, she said, Mommy, what are we? Are we white or are we Black? And she said, we're white. And she says, her daughter says, no, Mommy, no, I'm Black, Mommy, because Black Lives Matter. And that that shook me to my core. And it's, Blah, what are you doing? Why are you sitting on your couch? What are you doing? Get up, and go. And New Haven was having a march, and I joined the march in New Haven. I just try to hide in the back, and but eventually, in that first march I go to, I'm pulled up front by the police, the chief of like police, to kind of calm down the crowd. I don't know how they locate me. I was just trying to hide. I'm just getting it. I didn't feel like I was worthy to be recognized. I'm just got off the couch, literally. Leave me alone. Let me just try to work through my spirit. Pulled up to the front by the police of the chief, because the anger is just at a high level, and I speak, and the calm comes, and we all kneel and we pray, and we go to the police station, and I've just been working, marching, praying ever since. And so there's a transcendent spirituality, and then there's the immanent spirituality. And Black religion and Black folk have a secret door to the to an immanent spirituality that John Lewis spoke about, praying with the feet. There's something about marching and protesting, and praying with your feet, just doing whatever good you can that lifts you up and that is uplifting. And so that's what I've been doing. Everywhere I go, I've been just praying with my feet, and that's what's got me up.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we're coming into the home stretch here. I'm going to ask Rabbi Amy a question, and then Neil. And then I think we're going to conclude our evening together. And let me thank you all. I'll thank you again, but let me thank you now for your beautiful words and sharing what's been on your heart for the benefit of all of us. Thinking about and remembering what Imam Bilal has talked about, sort of getting up off the couch and resuming the walk, right? And this is a question from Houston as well, also from someone who has spent time with me in Jerusalem and in the land around it. on both sides of the green line there. How has the George Floyd tragedy affected your role, Rabbi Amy, in Burlington, Vermont, but also beyond, because you've got a national presence in the Jewish community, international presence?
Thank you. What I want to say is that this was a historic moment, this verdict that came through. And we pray that this historic moment is not simply a moment in time, but a shift, a turning of a corner into a new reckoning in our country. And that reckoning is about law enforcement, incarceration, and the way we treat each other. And there are so many parts of the way we've structured our nation for a very long time that need to be fixed. Just before the pandemic, I was with a rabbinic group in Montgomery, Alabama, to visit the new memorial and the museums that have been created by the Equal Justice Initiative. And I was so deeply moved by that and so anxious to be able to share that in programs through our community. And the pandemic hit, and we had our attention sort of shifted a bit. But there has not been a moment when this has not been front and center for many of us. So I am here to say that the George Floyd year-long, almost a full year-long tragedy and drama has been a significant turning point, we hope. But it is one in many. God, there's been so many where there has been death, and whereas there has been violence, and where there's been just tremendous injustice. And so this is to say, it has not put something on the map that wasn't already on the map, but it has given us new opportunities for our dialogue and our work together with our partners in our local community. And as soon as the pandemic is over, to be able to gather more, not only locally with the friends that we have made across interfaith lines, but also racial lines in projects that we have done as a community, but also to be able to do things like go to Montgomery, Alabama together, which I feel makes a tremendous impact on who we are when we have been there.
Thank you. And thank you for reminding us of these narrow places from which we need to be liberated, that we create for ourselves individually, as communities, as a society. I regularly remember the young people who participate in Jerusalem Peacebuilders, whether they are Israeli Jews or Palestinian Arabs or Americans of a variety of faiths. The words of Count Leo Tolstoy: everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change themselves. So, Father Neil, you are the human, ultimate human host of our conversation. I think we've all felt being held in the hand of God for this hour and a little bit. I'd love to ask you about a word of prophecy that you might share with us, coming from the prophets that we all look to and love, and what might be on your heart that you could share with us tonight.
This might be the question about, I was looking for a quote from Isaiah, but I was thinking about, this in the Christian tradition, liturgical tradition, we're coming up on Good Shepherd Sunday, which happens every season of Easter. And so the one constant in that is the reading of the 23rd Psalm in worship. And so the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And we might be afraid of a lot of things right now. We've been afraid of a lot of things, and there's so many unknowns and ahead of us. But what I do know, I don't know what those things will be, and I don't know what will happen to us, but what I do know is that we will not be alone, going back to all the stories that I shared earlier. And I really believe that. And I believe that's true for all of us. I believe that's true for even for people who feel God forsaken. I don't think that they are beyond God's embrace. And I think that's a hopeful thing for our world and for us and for the communities that we serve.
Thank you. And thank you all. I know that our Zoom host, Roger Hutchinson, wants to put in a word for all of us.
I just want to say thank you to each one of you tonight for being with us. For our panelists, I will carry Imam Ansari's laugh with me, his presence and words. Rabbi Amy, thank you so much for being with us. And Neil, it makes me proud to be a part of Palmer, that we can have these kinds of conversations with this beautiful group of people. So I want to share one last thing that we're going to have. Our next event like this is our next Great Wednesday webinar is going to be May the 5th, and it is going to be with Sam Sifton, who is with the New York Times. And so we are excited to invite him to join us. And I keep thinking that each one of these is going to be better or not as good as the last one. This one tonight was fantastic. So I'm grateful for that. And I know those who are watching are as well. Blessings to everybody. Imam Ansari, feel better soon. I hope you feel better very, very quickly. And Nicholas, thank you, sir, for doing a beautiful job tonight facilitating. Good night, everybody. Thank you. Imam wanted to say something.
Good night.
Yeah, I just want to say shout out to Rabbi Yehesko, who made space, who showed up by bringing us Rabbi Small.
Yes.
We thank you. His presence was felt. Thank you for that gift. Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you so much for saying that, Yechezkel. We love you. Okay.
We do.
Take care, everybody.
Blessings all. Bye now.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Pleasure
Bye-bye.
to be with you. Thank you.